We're live from our studios here, number 35, John Hammond Street in Accra. Hello, good afternoon to you. Welcome to the Midday News on 3FM 92.7. The bulletin is also live on all our social media platforms at 3FM 927. I am Noble Crosby Annan. This afternoon, Deputy Attorney General dismisses claims former NAFCO CEO was denied legal counsel, accusing his lawyers of acting in bad faith. Also, Ghana petitions African Union over renewed xenophobic attacks on Africans in South Africa. And later this afternoon, Upper East Regional Security Council orders all final year male students of Bolgatanga Technical Institute to immediately vacate campus over planned attack fears. We have details of these stories and a lot more coming to you shortly. Please stay with us. Welcome to the program. We're live on all our social media platforms at 3FM 927. Join us there and let's get interactive as we settle for the details beginning from here. The investigative committee that probed the death of a 29-year-old engineer, Charles Emisa, is meeting the health committee to present its findings and recommendations a day after same was presented to the sector minister. Professor Ajiman Bedu Akosa chaired committee found the victim died from denial of emergency care and medical neglect after a hit-and-run accident at the Kwame Nkrumah Circle overpass on February 6 this year. According to the report, Emisa suffered excessive blood loss and remained alive while being transported between the police hospital, the Greater Accra Regional Hospital, and the Kolebu Teaching Hospital. An investigator said all three hospitals failed to triage and initiate life-saving emergency treatment despite his critical condition. The committee concluded that timely medical intervention at any of the facilities could have saved his life. And the committee also found lapses on the part of some medical personnel and recommended disciplinary actions against 4 doctors and 3 nurses cited in the report. There's more in this report.
The Ministry of Health set up a committee led by Professor Ajiman Bedu Akosa, a renowned pathologist, to investigate the death of Charles Emisa, a 29-year-old engineer who died on February 6, 2026, after being denied emergency care at 3 major hospitals in Accra. Charles Emisa was struck in a hit-and-run incident. Officers from the National Ambulance Service responded promptly and stabilized him at the scene. However, despite being alive and in critical condition, he was turned away by 3 hospitals on the claim of no bed. Presenting the findings to the health minister, Professor Ajiman Bedu Akosa said Charles Emisa's death could have been avoided.
The pathology confirms a slow death from medical neglect and was not from the instant trauma. What it means is that if at any of these facilities there had been medical intervention, Charles Emisa could have survived. Charles Emisa died of exsanguination, excessive loss of blood. Death of Charles Emisa could have been avoided by medical intervention at the police hospital, the Greater Accra Regional Hospital, or Kolebu Teaching Hospital.
He explained that medical professionals failed to observe their ethical duty, leading to Emisa's death. Professor Akosa also highlighted key findings from the ambulance reports.
If the ambulance crew had applied compression on the laceration and packed the deep wound prior to transportation, they could have stopped the bleeding. If in the hospitals they had either given intravenous fluids or whole blood, either in police, the Greater Accra Regional Hospital, or Kolebu Teaching Hospital, they would have maintained life. Hospital failed to triage the patient and initiate stabilizing interventions. The medical staff on duty at the police hospital, Greater Accra Regional Hospital, and Kolebu Teaching Hospital failed to attend to Charles Emisa when he was in a life-threatening condition, and this led to his avoidable death.
The Health Minister, Kwabena Minta Akando, announced that disciplinary actions against the cited medical professionals will take immediate effect.
I want to accordingly direct my chief director, the chief director of the Ministry of Health, to write to the following people, the following health professionals and their hospitals and their regulators, that disciplinary actions be taken against them.
That was a report by my colleague Beatrice Ajoko Sowa. Let's now hear from the family of the late Charles Emisa, how they reacted to the findings of the committee.
The investigation was extensive. And I know that the sanctions will be dealt with according to the motherboard, depending on the health workers' place. So I agree with them with what they said. So the timing was very crucial for his life. For him to be saved. There may be some reasons. I'm sure they would have the medical officers, the health workers, and then the nurses would have their own reasons for what happened. But it cannot explain how long it took them to attend to Charles Emisa. So I think that there may be some systemic challenges, but indeed they could have done something. I would say that the system failed Charles because he's not the only one. When people come and tell their stories, and this Charles Emisa is not the first of such. So it has been something that has been going on for some time, and voices of such patient relatives have not been heard yet. So I would say that our emergency response is flawed. Equipping national ambulance to be able to handle emergencies, even in because the ambulance is also technically a hospital. We can make it that way that even patients' lives can be saved, but they don't have the necessary equipment to save life. The resources, the human, the personnel with the knowledge of acute care in these ambulances, paramedics and all that, they also need a lot of training. We also need to equip our lower facilities. We as health workers have a very big role in saving lives. We know that it will take a while for the systemic structures to be put in place, but what are we as doctors, as nurses, healthcare professionals doing in the interim? If you are too tired, you can escalate. If you need help, you can call for help and help will come to you. We haven't decided on anything yet. We were speculating and we didn't want to, step on toes and then run into, take actions that may not even be the reasons why this happened. We wanted the investigations to come to an end before if we can actually sit down and then discuss this.
That's the voice of Matilda Emisa, and she is sister of the late engineer Charles Emisa there. We'll be crossing over to my colleague Christian Yali in Parliament for some more on this. But let's speak to Professor Richmond Ayite from the School of Public Health. He's a public health expert. Prof, thank you for joining us on the program. Good afternoon to you. You've heard from the sister of the deceased. You followed the development since it happened in February. The report made available yesterday, the findings communicated. From where you sit, what do you make of what has happened so far, and where do we go from here?
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and my heart goes out to not only the family of Charles Emisa, but to all the countless people who have had challenges similar to this in our health system. I think that it is very clear from this that there is individual culpability, which I see really is what is at the heart of it is the lack of personal empathy. But we cannot also take out the issue of lack of our health institutions as an empathetic organization. And so if people walk into an institution like that to offer service, and here I'm speaking from the point of view of the providers, and they find that there is a culture that is not empathetic, they also begin to behave like that. And that has been like this for a long time. So that's where you hear health workers talking about the health system as a challenge. And indeed, there are challenges with the health system that we need to address. But we also need to address the culture of a lack of empathy. When you enter any health facility, it's very obvious. Perhaps it's because we are not training our health providers, and here we are not only talking about doctors and nurses, but along the entire value chain. Think about it. You enter any bank, the kind of experience you have at a bank, the typical bank, is probably better than what you would receive when you enter a hospital. Doesn't it sound odd? But that is where we are right now, and acknowledging that is probably the first step to be able to do something about it.
And Prof, speaking about this culture, how do we amend it? How do we transform or change it so that it moves from the current situation it is into a more appropriate, more human-centered, more empathetic one? Does it have to do with the trainings that these health professionals receive in school beyond the skill they acquire and they learn in the profession?
I think it's more than training. I mean, the curricula of our training involves social skills. When I started my career, there was a course that I took on the social basis of health, where you learn about all these things. But, people transition from training into work, and within work, there's a cultures that are established. And I think for those, it's a leadership issue. I mean, when you enter on an organization, the leadership is everything. Everything rises and falls with leadership. So in this situation, what we can do about it is for leadership of the entire health system. And here I'm not talking about hospitals. The way we operate and run health, hospitals are just a part of the health system. We need leaders in the health system, right from the head of the ministries and the regulators down to every single facility that is providing healthcare, to take the responsibility to transform this culture. Because, people take it for granted that when you go to a hospital or you enter any health facility, you have to behave as if you are afraid, because over years, health workers have abused, those who come seeking care. And leaders have made it look like that is the norm. So it is fine and good when our health minister recommends that we should have those who were found culpable to, go through disciplinary action. But he and everybody who holds leadership position have a responsibility to do soul searching and to see how do we change that culture from a leadership perspective. Of course, we need to also have in-service training, not just for these people who have been identified, but for everybody who touches clients one way or the other, in our health system. And I think that is something that if we fail to do, we've really missed an opportunity that Charles passing away has given us as a nation.
Prof, I'd like to thank you so much for your time with us on the program. Professor Richmond Ni Okai Ayite is a professor of public health nutrition at the University of Ghana, speaking with us there. My colleague Christian Yali, he's in Parliament right now and he's joining us to update us on what has been the reaction of some members of Parliament in relation to the findings and recommendations of this committee. Christian, take us away. What do you have for us?
Yes, Crosby. And so, following the presentation of the report by the investigative committee, we know that this was presented to the health committee, and as a matter of fact, after the presentation was made with the same findings that were made public yesterday with the minister, the health committee chairman, Dr. Mark Nawani, has been speaking largely to the fact that when you look at the core of the issue that was involved in Charles Amisa's case, it wasn't really even about no bed syndrome, because then it was purely about the attitude of medical officers and nurses who were at post at the time when he was, sent around these various medical facilities and was denied, medical attention. And so, basically, he has been saying that and has sent a direct message to health professionals that those who feel they are tired of working and they're tired of the profession, they rather put away or put aside their tools and resign from the work they're doing, so that those who are ready to work would be employed to work. As a matter of fact, he has indicated that the practice as it were in the medical profession, when you need support or you're unable to execute any function, you're always at liberty to seek support from senior medical officers who are always ready to support. And so the assumption or the expectation is that the recommendations in this report would be implemented to the level of Crosby.
I say, Christian, thank you so much for bringing us those details in Parliament. Christian Yali speaking with us in Parliament. The developing story, and we'll be keeping an eye on that, bringing you details as and when they happen. But away from that, Deputy Attorney General Justice Ramsay has refuted claims that the former NAFCO CEO Abdul Hannan was denied access to his lawyers while in Yoko's custody. Mr. Hannan Wahab and his wife were rearrested at the court premises on May 5 after the Attorney General withdrew charges including stealing, money laundering and defrauding by false pretenses. First, let's hear from Mr. Hannan's lawyer, Godfred Yeboah Dame, in relation to the claims that he made. After that, we can take a listen to Justice Ramsay in a rebuttal that claims that officials were rather waiting for Mr. Hannan's lawyers to interrogate their client.
It shouldn't be too dramatic about this. I spoke with him in the courts on Hannan in particular, and he made some requests, some of which have been granted, others may be granted in the future, and others have been refused.
He says that the issue of fresh charges that you talk about, fresh evidence, I beg your pardon, is non-existent. He says there's no case pending, there's no fresh evidence. What's your response to that?
How would he know? You see, instead of him to accompany his clients to do interrogation, through the interrogation, he's sitting on TV, calling to radio programs and talking. But his client will be going for interrogation today. He was discharged yesterday. He'll be going for interrogation today. That is when he will know. If he chooses not to be on radio and follow him, he will definitely know where the fresh evidence. He has no basis to know whether there's fresh evidence or not, because he has not accompanied his client to the office of.
And another thing he says is that he was denied access. He says they were denied access, but you were saying that they didn't come. So what exactly is the situation?
That is false. Completely false. His client was not well and was taken to the clinic yesterday. When they came back, the interrogators were waiting for him to come, because you cannot interrogate a suspect in the absence of his lawyer. And we know the accused person had lawyers. So it is fair and right and the proper thing to do to wait for the lawyers to come. He was nowhere to be found. Most of the time yesterday was spent waiting for him and his lawyers to come, and he never showed up. I think it was the same time that he was on TV and radio granting interviews. And I think that, you see, there should be some basic principles with which all of us work. Because I've had personal conversation with him on the day we withdrew the charges. And he made specific requests, some of which have been granted.
What are those requests?
This is a professional conversation, and I wouldn't want to disclose, and I think it's client. So I expect him to respect the confidence I have in him as a former Attorney General and the conversation we had. And one of the requests is still pending. You can ask him when he chooses to. You can ask.
Are you frustrated? What's the status of this fresh evidence you talk about, and when are we likely to see fresh charges being preferred against Abdul Hanan?
Process. You cannot just come to court when you have fresh evidence in a criminal trial and start throwing in the evidence. You need to, So you need to first interrogate and hear from the accused person in respect of those new, fresh evidence that you've gathered. That will inform your final decision whether to go ahead and charge the person or not. But to say that fresh evidence is not available merely because you don't have it is completely improper and unethical.
The voice of Justice Srem Sai is the Deputy Attorney General in relation to the latest concerning the former Buffer Stock CEO. To some other stories, Amnesty International is opposing the anti-LGBTQ bill currently before Parliament. Now launching its 2025 State of the World Human Rights Report, the board chair of Amnesty International, Francis Nyantichi, said the bill in its current form violate rights and calls on members of Parliament to vote against it. He further called on President John Dramani Mahama to ensure that recent human rights abuses are addressed, the continued existence of which comes as abolished and legislation is passed to protect all individuals. Joseph Armstrong Gold is at the event and will be touching base with him. But before that, he sent us this.
We think that the bill in its entirety violates human rights and is an affront to the Chapter 5 of the 1992 Constitution, as well as other international human rights standards. And like we said, human rights should not be something that we should toy with or should be defined by us the way we feel it should be. Human rights transcend beyond borders of countries, and countries should not have that flexibility of just defining to them what constitutes human rights. The moment we do that, we are setting the tone for disaster to happen. And so for us, we think that every bit, every word in that bill, we oppose it. It is something that we should not tolerate, and we urge Parliament to rethink.
The voice of Francis Nyantichi. He is the board chair of Amnesty International. Armstrong is joining us with some more details. Armstrong, briefly, talk to us. Beyond what Francis said, what else has been happening at this launch?
Okay, so all they is saying, as you rightly heard from Francis Nyantichi, is asking government to ensure a strict, impartial investigation into the attacks on journalists, including Justice for Ahmed Swale, repealing or reforming laws that restrict freedom of expression, impose laws regarding and protect women accused of witchcraft, among many others. They are asking the government to keep in ensuring that this thing is tackled to ensure that Ghana becomes one of the countries where people live freely without any restrictions.
I see. Armstrong, thank you so much for joining us with those details. Armstrong Gold Alogbe speaking to us in relation to the demands or the concerns from Amnesty International. Now, Ghana has officially petitioned the African Union to include the issue of xenophobic attacks against African nationals in South Africa on the agenda of the upcoming AU Media Coordination meeting slated for June 24 to 27 in Egypt. In a letter dated May 6 to the chairperson of the African Union Commission, Foreign Affairs Minister Samuel Okudzeto-Ablakwa expressed concern over the recurring attacks in South Africa, describing them as a threat to African solidarity, continental unity, and the safety of Africans living in the country. And the government of Ghana said the incident have led to the loss of lives and destruction of investments, while undermining the ideals of Pan-Africanism and regional integration across the continent. According to the letter, Ghana maintains that the attacks contravene the African Charter on Human Rights human and people's rights and are inconsistent with the objectives of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which promotes free movement and economic cooperation among African states. And Ghana is therefore urging the African Union to strengthen its monitoring mechanisms, establish a fact-finding mission into the causes of the violence, and facilitate dialogue and reconciliation efforts to promote tolerance and inclusion across Africa. The letter further stressed that Africa's future must be anchored on shared dignity, mutual respect, and unity, insisting that no African should be dehumanized on African soil. This is all the midday news here on 3FM 92.7, also live on all our social media platforms at 3FM 927. Now, the Christian Council of Ghana has joined the Ghana Catholic Bishops' Conference in condemning what it describes as act of public nudity and indecency during the Carnival Kingdom Festival held in Accra from April 22 to 28. In a strongly worded statement, the council said the conduct not only offends public morality but also violates sections 278 of the Criminal Offences Act 1960, Act 29. It warned that such acts undermine Ghana's cultural values and moral standards and pose a threat to the country's social fabric. The Christian Council also expressed concern over reports that some participants involved in the act received police protection during the festival. It has therefore backed calls for a full, transparent, and impartial investigation into the circumstances surrounding the event, including the granting of permits and the deployment of security personnel. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Tourism, Arts, Culture has distanced itself from the event, saying it did not grant the organizers the permission to have the event there. This is still the midday news on 3FM 92.7. But that's our package for you this afternoon. Of course, there's always more news on our website, 3news.com. Please log on for more. I am Noble Crosby Annan, and have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Business Daily on 3FM 92.7 with me, Bismarck Ausa. Coming up, new reports warns Bank of Ghana's aggressive inflation fight and costly liquidity operations are deepening central bank financial losses amid currency stabilization efforts. Also ahead, financial analyst warns of rising inflation risks as Ghana's 15-month decline ends with an April rate of 3.4%.
Businesses can still plan, can still go ahead and invest, but keeping a sharp eye lookout for what is happening in the Middle East.
Plus, Ghana's fixed income market turnover dips to 430 million cedis as treasury bills maintain dominance. We'll bring you details of our headlines and other stories shortly. Please stay. Thanks for your company. Now to the details. A new policy analysis by the Center for Economic Research and Policy Analysis, CEPA, says the Bank of Ghana's aggressive efforts to tame inflation and stabilize the cedi are significantly worsening the central bank's financial position. According to the think tank, high interest rates, expensive liquidity control measures, and exchange rate pressures are driving mounting operational losses, raising concerns over the long-term sustainability of the bank's balance sheet. The following 3 Business News Desk report has the details. In its latest policy brief, the think tank says the Bank of Ghana's reliance on tight monetary policy tools, including high interest rates, open market operations, and central bank bills, has significantly increased operational losses. CEPA explains that efforts to absorb excess liquidity from the financial system have become more expensive under the current high interest rate environment, placing additional strain on the bank's finances. The report also points to the depreciation of the cedi as a major contributor to the losses, noting that the weakening local currency increases the domestic value of the Bank of Ghana's foreign liabilities, resulting in revaluation losses. CEPA says, although the measures are necessary to control inflation and restore economic confidence, they present a difficult trade-off between macroeconomic stability and the financial health of the central bank. The think tank is further raising concerns about quasi-fiscal interventions such as the Gold for Oil and Gold for Reserves programs, arguing that such initiatives fall outside the bank's core mandate. CEPA is therefore calling for a policy rethink and urging government to gradually take over non-core interventions, while the Bank of Ghana focuses primarily on price stability. And that was a 3 Business News Desk report on a new policy analysis by CEPA, warning Bank of Ghana's aggressive inflation fight and costly liquidity operations are deepening central bank financial losses amid currency stabilization efforts. Moving on, while Ghana's inflation remains historically low, businesses are being urged to keep a watchful eye on global volatility. Chief Executive Officer of Dalex Finance, Joe Jackson, has signaled that while the current economic climate is good for now, significant external risks are beginning to gather on the horizon. This comes off on the back of Ghana's annual inflation, edging up by 0.2 percentage points in April.
Ghana's annual consumer inflation rose to 3.4% in April 2026 from 3.2% in March 2026, ending a 15-month decline as rising cost of housing and transport snapped the nation's consistent disinflationary streak. Government statistician Dr. Alhassan Idrisu noted the slight uptick could have been more pronounced were it not for government policies.
The supply constraints, we talked about market access, and then we talked about transportation. Government is still implementing its fiscal consolidation program, optimizing or maximizing revenue collection. At the same time, government is also saying, look, the expenditure side, there's so much waste, so I'm going to make sure that I cut waste.
Chief Executive Officer of Dalex Finance, Joe Jackson, highlighted 2 primary catalysts that could disrupt Ghana's price stability.
You're still way below the target range, so we can't complain. Prices may go up slightly, but they will go up at a much slower rate. The cedi has been under a bit of pressure in the last few weeks, so it's not surprising that prices of imported goods are going up. Risk is the risk of this Middle East war.
Despite these pressures, the outlook for the private sector remains cautiously optimistic.
Businesses can still plan, can still go ahead and invest, but keeping a sharp eye lookout for what is happening in the Middle East. As for the average person, prices may still go up, but they won't go up as high. So you can keep doing what you're doing, but be a lot more cautious than you were 3 months ago.
The government remains stable enough for strategic planning, but the era of easy disinflation may be coming to an end.
And that was a report on Ghana's annual consumer inflation rising to 3.4% in April 2026, ending a 15-month decline as rising costs in housing and transport. This is still Business Daily on 3FM 92.7 with me, Bismarck. Outside some other stories, activity on the Ghana's fixed income market slowed sharply on Tuesday, May 5, 2026, with total turnover closing at 430.15 million cedis. The session was characterized by a preference for short-term liquidity as investors channeled the bulk of their capital into treasury bills and sell buyback transactions. The following 3 Business News Desk report has the details.
Data from the May 5 trading session reveals a market that was not only quieter but also highly concentrated. Out of the 431 trades executed, the vast majority were driven by treasury bills. This segment alone accounted for over 285 million cedis, cementing its role as the market's primary liquidity anchor. Investors continue to favor this short-duration instrument because they offer predictable pricing and faster exit options in an uncertain economic climate. The most active paper of the day was a treasury bill maturing in January 2027, which alone cleared nearly 59 million cedis across 16 trades. Outside of the T-bill space, activity was sporadic. Sell and buyback transactions involving government notes and bonds contributed approximately 93 million cedis to the total volume. Meanwhile, the Domestic Debt Exchange Program (DDEP) segment remained incredibly thin, with only a single trade recorded for a February 2027 bond totaling 50 million cedis. On Tuesday, only 2 trades were recorded for a corporate debt totaling less than 1 million cedis. This ongoing lack of interest underscores a structural imbalance in Ghana's financial market, where secondary liquidity is almost entirely dominated by government paper. As long-term government bonds and corporate debt remain sidelined, short-term government paper continues to set the tone for the nation's fixed income landscape.
And that was a 3 Business News report. Before we go, the Ministry of Food and Agriculture says it is working to introduce value addition to eggs produced locally as part of efforts to address a growing glut in the sector. This follows concerns raised by egg suppliers in parts of the country who have called on the government to intervene in a trade impasse with Burkina Faso that has halted exports for more than 2 months.
The suspension has led to an oversupply on the local market, pushing down prices and threatening the livelihoods of poultry farmers and distributors. Amid the glut, government is also pushing ahead with plans to revitalize the poultry sector, raising concerns about a potential increase in excess supply. Speaking on the sidelines of the Southern Zone Ghana Poultry Master Plan Stakeholders Dialogue, the Chief Technical Advisor to the Ministry of Food and Agriculture, Kwesi Etubonde, said plans are underway to add value to eggs to help stabilize the market.
The bumper harvest we got this year in terms of maize and soya, and we are looking at the situation where we can process the egg. You know, egg can be processed into powder. So the value addition, that is why the master plan, we've commissioned them to look at it for us. So when you produce and the market is there, everybody will be happy.
Meanwhile, Group CEO of Agri-Impact Group, Dr. Daniel Fahene Akwe, has called on the financial sector to move beyond financing production and support value chain development to maximize impact in the poultry sector.
When we are looking at financing, we should look at it from the value chain point. If you also finance processor and that processor doesn't get the beds, that processor will be operating at 20% capacity. We want to have this inclusive, and that is the model that we piloted with the Happy program, and we saw the benefits. So now you go and there's a processor and there are outgrowers who are producing to feed the factory.
And that was a report on government moving to introduce egg value addition amid export impasse with Burkina Faso. And that brings us to the end of Business Daily on 3FM 92.7 with me, Bismarck. Also, for more business stories, please check out our website 3news.com. Thanks for your company.